I've been reading sci-fi for most of my life, since a very early age. So I have always been fascinated by computers and the technology of cutting edge states, wherever they may be. So this today is a gamble through the technology which interested and continues to fascinate me. Many of you will know the computer games that are around today. These take maybe a couple of years to write, so they're quite remarkable. They're quite complex in their what is part of them, Xboxes and PlayStations and other things, that they're fascinating. That I find partly fascinating. And I was speaking to my brother about this the other day, and he said, "Do you remember the game that we used to play when we were very young at the arcade?" And it was called Pong. And I'm sure a few other members may remember it, because it was one of the very first computer games, and it was just a battering of a ball which would go across the screen, and you would bat it back to the opponent, and that was the start of computer games. One of the big phrases today is, which you will hear when people ask about a question of something, the phrase will be "Google it," which again has become a very big thing in our life. That if you want to know something, you go on the screen and go bling 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 bling, and it will tell you a answer or possibly the answer. The two. And computers have become very much part of our life. They're very integral to what we do. We all know such things as emailing, checking on different websites for different information to communicate with each other like we're doing at the moment. And banking. Banking has become a very, very big thing. There are a large amount of people who do, computer banking now, who do everything. Pardon me. What they do is their banking is done online. I don't know if many people who are with me today do that type of thing, but some people don't. Yeah, Angela shakes her head. Right. The other thing, which has become big, a very big thing, is you get on the bus today. How many people do you see who are not looking at their mobile phones? Very, very few. I could tell you the story about that was that I was the bus that I get, a lot of university students get on and off it, and so it's enormously crowded. And I was standing there and looked down at this lady who was flipping through her mobile phone. And I seriously wish I hadn't, because the pictures she was looking at was gentlemen who had no clothes on whatsoever. She was looking at these, and I thought, oh, goodness me. But then it's one of those things. The other time was when I was in a mobile phone shop with a friend and looking at new mobile phones. And this little old lady was speaking with her younger person, presumably son or grandson or something like this, and being shown a phone. And she was saying, but I don't need a camera or a this or a that. And she was explaining the things she didn't need. I just need a phone to contact people. And he looked at her, and then I realized it was her son. She said, but mother, he says, you will use them over time. You will text people, and you will take photographs to show your grandsons and to your friends and things like this. And she thought for a few moments and smiled and said, possibly, dear. And that was the end of that quotation. But as computers grow in complexity, which they are at the moment, we use them more and more, and they use more and more for different people. They're used for training purposes, especially in a thing called VR, which is virtual reality. This is used as a training tool, and it's being used by the forces, the Army, Navy, Air Force, and this type of thing. Because I read a little bit where the Ministry of Defense was using it to train pilots. And they use it also to train tank crews. And when you think about it, this is quite logical, because if you're thinking of aircraft, military aircraft, which cost over 3 million quid each, and you get tanks which are well over £1 million each nowadays, you can't crash those with nothing going wrong, So that is the interesting idea, I think, where we're starting to go on those type of things. The next thing I'd like to meander on for a few moments is work. Britain has stopped being a manufacturing base for a long time now. Robots do most of the work. If it is production, you find a lot more robots are becoming to do more work in that. The easier robots come to set up and operate, the more sections of business can benefit from basic manufacturing. And that, I suggest to you, is good news. For people, robots can exceed at doing the dull, the dirty, the repetitive, and the dangerous jobs that people increasingly don't want to do. The idea of the production line nowadays is sadly gone. So proverbial spanners cannot be thrown in, are not usually thrown into the works anymore. I'm sure a number of you will have will understand that reference. One factory which I read of in the United States, what made the computers were making computer components, which seems amusing. Computers making computers for themselves. So make another arm. Very silly of me, I know. But during the COVID situation, this factory was repositioned to not make computer components, but within a month, they had switched these machines to cut and weld ventilators. Which, to do it that quick is quite remarkable, because if it was wanted to be done by physical humans and physical ways of actually repositioning that, I would suggest it would have taken quite a lot longer.
Mm.
One of the other modern tech thing that is, and I could spend perhaps an hour or maybe less slightly doing that, is food, and how that is becoming much more a factory thing.
Mm.
It will not be long before your burger is made in a factory without any recourse to any living animal whatsoever, because of gene technology and because of actually computer developments. This is coming along quite quickly. The one developer said that he reckons within the next few years, he will be able to make a steak, which for all purposes will taste and look like a beef steak, which you would get at your butcher's. Slightly mind-boggling, you'd have thought, wouldn't you? But here's another thing, which I read only a couple of days ago, which I thought was quite remarkable. A few factories in America weren't being used as factories anymore because a lot of the stuff that they were doing there had been sent to India and China, where it's manufactured a lot cheaper. These factories were then used, and I saw pictures of this. You had big racks, going up to the ceiling, rack upon rack upon rack upon rack. And in these racks, they were growing vegetables hydroponically. These vegetables were grown in complete conditions where vegetables can grow perfectly, because you didn't have the wind, you didn't have the rain, so conditions were prime to grow these vegetables. And they were watered at certain times, everything was done to grow them, and they grew them organically. So this is another way of a development of food, which we wouldn't have seen many years ago. It's an interesting way forward. I can see the complications and the problems of that. But you'd have to admit, for technology, it's a pretty interesting way forward. The big group, which started out as a small group, which grew the meat, was a few years before that a startup, which you've no doubt heard of, lots of those which come on. Some of them make millions, some make billions, type of things like that, but this one started small and is now growing to be quite an interesting player in the market. But not all startups do very well. There was one which I was reading about in a magazine called Wired, and it was valued at the time $6.9 billion. The group was called Theanos, Theranos, and it advertised itself as a new blood testing strategy. Its founder, Elizabeth Holmes, is facing charges in the American court at the moment for defrauding investors, doctors, and patience with hyped claims about medical technology. Things don't go as you way, the way you thought they might have, you know. Right. The next thing is a little bit on something David mentioned last week. And this is what I think is an amazing new technology, amazing new discovery, which I think could be, without wishing to emphasize that strange statement, a game changer. This is something called graphene, Graphene, and its potential is amazing because it's stronger than steel, it's lightweight, and it's flexible. And so it can be used in lots of electronic and thermoconductive, and it's transparent. This is, you know, it is 1 million times thinner than the diameter of a single hair. I'll give you a couple of seconds to go, what? Before I continue, because it is quite remarkable. The possibilities of fully charging a smartphone in seconds and your electronic car in minutes.
Yeah.
The University of Manchester are developing graphene-based membranes. And this is the bit which made me go, wow, because it filters water. You take one end in your dirty water type of things, and the other end comes out as clean water. Now, that to me, you know, if can be used within third world countries and developed up from there, it's just well worth thinking about, I think. Right. If you're interested in more about this, I would encourage you to go onto the website and put in University of Manchester graphene, and there they do a bit more about how they are doing development work with that. You know, it's well worth looking at because, you know, it boggled my mind a bit. Now, the next piece I would like to run past you basically is something which I have doubts about, but there are a lot of people out there who believe in this. The writer, Ray Kurzweil, wrote a book called The Singularity is Near. In it, he advocated for the singularity where the computer and the human meet. Ray believes that this union will take place sooner than I do, a lot sooner than I do, basically, because to me, the human brain is so complex that developments along those lines, which he envisages, are still in the realms of sci-fi stories, which I still love to read. But there are a lot of people called post-humanists, among others, the other words they call themselves, who believes that this will happen in their lifetime. The book which I read about this, which I think is the best book I've read so far about it, is by a chap called Mark O'Connell, and it's called To Be a Machine. It is that one there. Mark writes on the back of the book, what is transhumanism? Simply put, it is a movement whose aim is to use technology to fundamentally change the human condition, to improve our bodies and minds to the point where we become something other and better than the animals we are. In To Be a Machine, Mark O'Connor journeys down the rabbit hole and presents us with the first full-length exploration of transhumanism, its philosophical and scientific roots, its key players, and what it might mean for our possible futures. It's a complex book, but I was interesting. I couldn't read it all at once, because it would have been, it'd been boggled my mind. But one bit where one of the positive people makes a comment, which I thought was kind of interesting, so I went back and read it again, was, he spoke now of greater benefits that would come to all things being equal, all things being equal, with the advent of artificial superintelligence. By developing such a transforming technology, he said, we would essentially be delegating all future innovations, all scientific and all technical processes to the machine. I think statements after that should go with kind of music from the X-Files. But there you go. Right. There is a debate going on now about Chinese tech that's been embedded in the 5G towers and 5G technology, which we have going on at the moment. It's been rolled out quite quickly at the moment. The USA are opposed to this. They say, it's technology that China could listen in on us. And I'd like to use a phrase now from what my old granny one used to say, pot and kettle, dear. The Chinese were listening to us, yes, but the Americans would also. So, it is not something I would say is a good statement, because many years ago, a American company was taken to court for using technology that it got illegally from a British firm. The FBI had been listening in on British technology and had surreptitiously found this idea from this company and had given it to an American company. It makes you think, doesn't it? Yeah. Oh, I'm getting a bit far in front of myself, I'm afraid, at the moment. So I am getting near the end, as the phrase goes. I would suggest to you, though, that in not too many years, we will use the development of VR will be at such a state where we'll be able to use it, possibly in our own homes and possibly at, a game center or something, to be kind of nearly totally immersed in it. So you can be skiing down Mont Blanc. You can be climbing Everest. You can be doing most other things like walking on Mars or something like this, but doing it because, sorry, Hattie said something there and I went, whoop. But
you will be doing.
Sorry?
You said you will be doing.
Yeah.
These things.
Because your brain will be thinking that is happening, because you'll be so immersed in the VR experience. It would be as if you were there. Fun, eh? What? But this is something which will be used as diverse things that you can do. Nowadays, would I do it? Possibly, but I'm still the old Luddite who will curl up with a good book, who will watch a film on television or on the cinema because it is great. Cinemas are becoming much more very immersed at the moment, because if you can, the sound which you get from going to the cinema is far superior than you watching the film on television. The screen is larger. There's a possibility within a few years you could have smelly cinema. Actually, the smells of the place you are watching. I think that has pluses and minus points to it. But I would like to just leave you with something which I have been reading about, which has interesting thoughts to it, or more interesting thoughts, dodgy as well. We are studying the brain, not we, everybody, the kind of society is studying the brain and studying different parts of it and how it works and what we do and all this type of thing. And I still say to people, the brain is still the most complex computer we have. No computer has even got close to reproducing what the brain can do. And that to me still is mind-boggling. But we are starting to develop parts of it, interesting parts of it. And here's a proposition for you. If we could connect up or by wire to the pleasure principles, pleasure parts of the brain, and connect those to the computer. Just think where our imagination would take us. he sits now, and I have finished maybe about 5 or 10 minutes before I thought I would. But questions and comments, friends.
You want to go first?
Patsy, you need to unmute yourself there.
Who's going to speak?
You're still muted, Patsy.
Bottom left. Under your picture.
Sorry?
Move the cursor there.
In your actual picture at the top right, a button appears that says mute and unmute.
Oh.
Well,
There you go.
I didn't know about that one. Sorry. I'm ever so interested in the burgers because I adore burgers, but I don't eat them because I don't believe in eating meat. So these burgers you were talking about, can you say a little bit more about it? Is it just the bread that's like that, or do they construct the entire thing? And is it vegan all the way through? Do you know how it would be done?
They take the genome of the animal and breed that into and produce other chemicals with it, so it produces this. I am not too well up on the science of it, but you know, I was reading, you know, that this was how it was done.
Right. Yeah, I would really be interested in that.
Not one cow was hurt in the process. Hattie.
Well, my concern about these hydroponics, my concern is how much energy does it take, because you have to provide the electricity and the heat to keep it all at the right temperature, so that's quite an investment. And all the chemicals that are needed, like minerals, who's going to mine them, and where does the supply come from, and what landscape damage and biodiversity damage does that do? So I still have big questions about the supply chain for hydroponics.
Biodiversity in the sense is that, you know, there is no it's, if you grew the thought is, if they're grown outside in fields, you can't control the growth, and the statement is that they're all done organically, so you won't use pesticides or chemicals or that type of thing, which will be part of it. But they grow, you know, kind of, you don't have wind and rain and things like that that could spoil them.
Have you been to a hydroponics greenhouse?
No, I've only read about it, as I've said.
Okay, so the plants are grown in a little block. They do have roots, obviously, these plants, but they're grown in a block of foam plastic, I suppose, made from, well, I don't know what they're made from, but they have to have a block, and they might be made from fossil fuel origin. I don't know. Then you have to water them with the correct balance of minerals, and it's those I'm talking about: selenium, magnesium, zinc. Who mines them? Congo? You know, where are they coming from? I don't like the costs of tar sands, for instance, which is going to is probably flooding the plastics market at the moment. So plastic is going to become so cheap that whatever campaigning we do to reduce use of plastic is actually fighting an enormous uphill battle, because plastics are so cheap. Marketing will carry on using plastics because it's cheaper than paper, etc. So I'm worried.
You see, I don't have all the answers, and those things that Hattie has said, you know, kind of then makes me think, maybe, you know, it's not such a good idea. because, you know, one reads these ideas, and it's only after speaking to other people can you come up with another suggestion, which say, oh yeah, I agree with you there. No, I would never be so Luddite as to say, you know, no, it's my view, and I'm sticking with it. Chris.
Yes, I think I can say I'm not a Luddite, but I am worried about who controls, particularly the developments in digital technology. You were talking about creating a sort of total picture in the mind with the use of technology. Already, as you pointed out, you go into the bus and most people are holding their mobiles and watching it. So the question is both who controls in the sense of which human being control these developments, like who controls Google and who controls Facebook, but also the human being as a whole. Way back in the 60s, was it, or early 70s, I went to a film called Alphaville. You may remember it. Alphaville.
Can't get it out.
And this was a dystopian vision of a totally rational, electronically controlled future. And the message was that eventually the computers decided that the real problem in the whole system, the real irrationality, was the human being. And that I think we need to look at. We don't want these tools, and they are valuable tools, controlling us.
We could be sort of phased out, couldn't we? Mind you, that might not be such a bad thing.
One of the things about the technology is to be able to give information, to be able to produce good information which people can access. You know, differing talks that go on. You know, there's if I remember rightly, there was a thing called the MOOCs, which were multi-online training ones, which were given free by universities for people to go on and for people to study in, you know, and that I thought was a very good thing.
Cassie's got it.
Okay. I don't know very much about graphene, and so my questions are: what's it made from? What's it cost? How does it get disposed of when it's finished with?
I think David knows more about this than me. David.
Graphene is a purified form of graphite. It's actually pure carbon, which can exist in various forms like diamond structure. Carbon has got 4 linkages, and in a diamond it forms a sort of 3-dimensional structure. In a lot of, well, you'll know from your organic chemistry that carbon forms in rings, and graphene is a pure carbon ring structure. So it's hexagonals. Imagine you're looking at a honeycomb. It's that structure, but at every point the honeycomb is joining at 3 points, there's a carbon atom there.
3 linkages.
Yeah, 3 linkages. And so and that means it's got a little electronic cloud above and below it. And it turns out to be very strong. And it was made by this Russian chemist, Ari de Geis, who was trying to say, how thin can you make, if you put graphite on sticky tape, and tear it apart, a little bit goes to either side. Can you keep doing that indefinitely? And it comes down to one atom thick is the thinnest you can get. And now they're sort of able to make it in sheets. And it has interesting properties for conducting and, as Ray said, for filtering and so on. So it's a fairly pure, it's a very pure material. It would be very easy to recycle it. But I mean, that's just one example. What I wanted to say was that before Ray Kurzweil was predicting the singularity, which is where computers get more intelligent than us and take over, there's a French Jesuit who some of you may have heard of, Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, and he was looking at the idea of the evolution of just evolution. He was an evolutionary biologist in some ways, and he's saying, first of all, you get in evolution the evolution of geology, and then plant, and then more advanced levels, and he's looking at it as the evolution of consciousness. And he's saying at some point you reach a point where consciousness becomes unified, which he called the omega point. So writers who are talking about a kind of omega point with machines are following on from the idea of an omega point of humans. And the difference between us and machines is that we are conscious, we are sentient, and we're aware of our thoughts, whereas machines are just running algorithms, running sets of rules which mimic intelligence, but it's not so conscious. Anyway, but we have to decide what we want to do now, because the military potential for robotic technology and artificial intelligence is horrifying, and it isn't a question, you or I don't get to decide whether this stuff will be used. It's already being used by militaries around the world, and the military will implement this stuff because if we don't, somebody else does. We have to stay ahead of the competition. So you need a unified world before you can talk about creating a world that's peaceful and in which technology isn't used for military purposes.
When?
Yes, as following on the last point that was raised about military intelligence, at a previous arms fair, the Dicey Arms Fair that I'm sure you looked at, I was leafleting the delegates going in and out of the arms fair, whom we usually classify as all arms dealers. And one lady approached me and she said she wasn't an arms dealer, but she was a university lecturer in robotics. And she said she had to attend the arms fair because the most advanced technology is in the defense industry, her terms, and nobody studying engineering in any form, all people, all students, they are advised to study developments in the defense industry. And that was why she was at an arms fair. And I thought that was, quite, interesting that she was disclaiming any interest in defense. And it was quite funny that when the policeman came to arrest me, she told off the policeman and was extremely angry and ranted at him that what was he doing arresting somebody who was only giving out leaflets and interrupting a conversation, and this was somebody not at all defensive of the arms trade, but felt absolutely obliged to study it. So this was a university lecture, students all the way down, they look to the military and take their guidance from it. And what you said earlier about in America, the factories converting to making ventilators, this has happened in arms companies in this country, and it includes the members of the Air Force and the Royal Navy who are seconded to work for arms companies. And normally they dress in civilian clothes and they work the same hours as their civilian counterparts. But now some of them won't have been making weapons for the last year. They'll have been making medical equipment.
Mm-hmm.
When they go back to weapons, their civilian colleagues might say, I got satisfaction out of making something different. I'm going to look for a different job. But the member of the Air Force or the Navy is just told to go back to making weapons and hasn't got a choice, you know, which is, I think, worrying.
I think there are two ways that the world can go within the future. It is that we could proceed on with the mad dictum, or we could start, or a bit rather small, in a small way, is the development of the other way, that this man is my friend, no matter whether he is Russian, Chinese, Serbo-Croat, you know, each person is as Quakers would say, each person is a child of God. Therefore, you know, we affirm this type of thing. It's what we are doing. That's what we are doing at the moment. And I can see the slight growth of this, where you have refugees coming from war-torn communities, and they are coming into Europe, and they say that they wish to be part of us because we are free and we are peaceful and we are no one is bombing us, type of thing. And nearly out of self-interest, I can see European countries starting to change their mindset. Everybody here may disagree with me, and I could say that's okay, but I believe that that we are seeing a change more out of self-interest at the beginning rather than status as it is. Would anybody say, you're absolutely daft, you don't know what you're talking about?
I suppose I'm worried. I mean, is that going to prevent another Hitler, anybody who gets into power goes power mad, and drug cartels murdering people left, right and centre? I mean, that's happening on the ground. You're talking about countries up in the governments talking to each other, but I think you have to remember that humanity is on the ground, and how does one get to them? How do you stop people being brought up with hate and isolationism? It's so individual. David. Oh, sorry.
You teach meditation in schools. It's as simple as that.
Yeah.
If you find something that children enjoy doing, that makes them want to study, that makes them want to cooperate, that makes them feel peaceful, and you discover it's improving academic performance and so on. That kind of idea spreads, and the meditation is just creating an orderliness in brainwaves and a connectedness between people. And when you feel connected to people, you don't feel aggression towards them. So you create an expanding wave of peace. So that's the, if you like, the mechanics behind the Omega point is, you know, what do individuals do to tap in more effectively to a field that connects all of us. And, you know, I was mentioning to friends before I went on it that I was on a meditation course a couple of weekends ago that had 10,000 ordinary people, but a couple of hundred schools. So some tens of thousands more children, creating initially a wave of peace in the school in the local area, but what they call a taste of utopia. If that were to catch on, and it is, you know, there's one school system in South America that signed up for something like 1,200 schools where all the children will learn to meditate. And you look at the film of the children just sitting in lines, some of them fidgeting, but obviously with their minds settled. I was crying watching a film of that because it was so moving to see that the kids were getting something that brings peace and calm from the inside.
David, what film?
I got a little video which I put on the cloud. Before we finish in a few minutes, I will put a link in the. This is a screen capture from the event that I was on, and there's two little films. I'll put links to both of them, and I'll get them sent out with the notices.
They used to say when I was a young hippie, it's the vibes, man.
Yeah.
Chris.
I would endorse certainly the need for spiritual revival, for looking inwards. It's also true that as people from other parts of the world settle, initially, if you look at where I used to live, East London, there are hostile reactions. But over time, when people meet person to person, face to face, taking their kids to school or in the shops or whatever, actually attitudes change. There was a time when the British National Party got a council member elected from the Docklands area. That would not happen now. And that is at least in part significantly because the new arrivals are now my neighbours, my friends, the people I play football with or whatever.
Did you want to say something, Sheena?
Well, I hesitated, but we're talking about children and our neighbours that people will meet. But I have not ever had the opportunity whilst I've lived in Bristol to hear or to meet with an unemployed person or an unemployed, whether it's an unemployed refugee or an unemployed person who's been, young man or woman who's been living in this country. When I was involved with the Quaker tapestry, the one I did most research for was the unemployment and poverty, a continuing concern. And that title we added on later because I realized that unemployment, a bit like we used to say, the poor are always with us. The unemployed seem to be always with us, and more so now. So with the advent of technology, some of the unemployed are getting left more and more behind. What do we know of the unemployed in the Bristol area? What projects are going on for the unemployed?
I personally don't know of anything.
But the big hope, which has been diluted somewhat, is that the shift that we will make as a society is to being more sustainable. And if you ask the American Department of Defense what's the biggest problem facing humanity right now, it isn't terrorism in Afghanistan, which was largely manufactured by the Americans anyway. It's global warming, which was manufactured by all of us. So the biggest threat to humanity at the moment is global warming. The part of the solution is we've got to live more sustainably in every way. Military are actually interested in that and have some technologies that could help us live more sustainably. And according to, there's a film, I put the link in again, an economist called Jeremy Rifkin has made a film called The Third Industrial Revolution. And he's explaining that there's enough work for 2 generations of humanity in shifting from unsustainable to sustainable lifestyles. So we could be fully employed, just sorting ourselves out for a couple of generations and living with lower impact. And from the last election, the joint Labour and Green manifesto was around the idea of a Green New Deal. So you had Roosevelt created a New Deal in America when there was a great deal of poverty and unemployment. And he said, let's just make jobs. We'll use government money, we'll print government money to create jobs that are building infrastructure, and that infrastructure is useful. If you just print money and give it to bankers, it doesn't do any good. But if you print money and create jobs that are building new sustainable infrastructure that will help us live more harmoniously. Unfortunately, that seemed to disappear in this latest round of elections from the manifesto, because Labour have again become concerned about being electable, having lost votes in some of their key northern constituencies. But what you saw in Bristol was a green surge. We have as many Green councillors now as we have Labour councillors, which suggests that the population wants us to engage in social change and in environmental change. And if we could only start doing that, instead of fighting each other on who should be in charge of doing it, then you would tackle unemployment. In the same way, homelessness, we thought homelessness could never be solved. But when COVID came out, the government said, we don't want anybody to be homeless and on the streets. We want all the homeless to be housed by Saturday. And that was on a Thursday. And 80% of the homeless were housed by the weekend in Bristol.
And there was government funding for that action?
Yeah. So you know, it's what do we want to do? We should be advising the AIs, not having them tell us what we should be doing, unless they seem to be giving good advice. And it should be, you know, how let's ask the question, how can we live most sustainably on the planet? And let's ask it of our machines, and let's ask it of ourselves.
So on a very simple, basic standard, we as humans need other people. We cannot be a single person. We cannot do things of a significant worth as a single person. We are pack animals, basically. We need other people to live our lives. You know, and in that sense, you know, that we need to get together. We need to actually start to express our views of what our views are, not being told by others kind of titularly in power what we should believe. Ben.
Yes, it's just a point about Sheena's mention about people who are unemployed. We mustn't forget the people who are only unemployed because they're forbidden by law to take work, and that is undocumented migrants. They are not allowed to work, and they're not allowed to have recourse to public funds, which means they cannot sign on at a job centre. One reason that you may not have encountered such people in Bristol, Sheena, is that in Bristol we have been impressed by the number of very good organisations that are addressing the basic poverty, providing food and providing shelter for people. If you had lived in East London, where we were for nearly 30 years, you would have met lots of people who were not allowed to work and not allowed to have benefit because they're begging in the streets. And you couldn't, and if you were attending a court case for a peace comrade while you're waiting for that case, there would be a line of such people appearing in the courts, because anything they did to get an income was illegal. It's illegal to squat, it's illegal to beg, it's obviously illegal to steal, and most of all it's illegal to work. And there's a whole network of terrible sweatshops that have just been created by the Home Office because they'll employ people who haven't got national insurance, and they'll employ them for £2 an hour, working appalling hours. And it's not voluntary unemployment. I've met doctors and nurses who were working in their hospitals before they had to flee, and they're not recognized as refugees over here, and desperate because they could be using their skills, and they losing their skills the longer they're not allowed to work.
Angela.
I'd just like to remind everybody that you can do a tiny bit every week, spending £3 buying Big Issue. Big Issue magazine, started by John Bird, does a totally impressive work. My daughter in Leeds, who's a Quaker, sent me her Big Issue, and it has totally different articles from the Bristol one. So please spend £3 a week doing your tiny bit of helping. Positive help that can do. It's a brilliant magazine and a really good read.
Hattie.
I agree. This week I bought one from the local Big Issue guy on the street, and there's his story. And he says that it was a local person who got him housed, because a local person here got together and did a crowdfund for him, and now he's housed, and he's a really lovely guy. So that's just one example. Another example is somebody who overstayed his visa here, and he was employed by a hotel in London, £35 per night, 12-hour shift, 7 days a week. And if he wanted a friend, he had no accommodation, so he tried to sleep during his shift. And so he was dreadfully short of sleep. I mean, we took him to the British Museum, and he just sat on a bench and dropped asleep. And if he wanted a friend to stay overnight, because they were visiting London, so we did, he was docked £35 off his pay. I don't think he was paid £35 a night. Oh, he might have been, yeah, 12 hours. Yeah, that's right. 2 or 3 quid, yeah. horrible. And the debt collectors still come to my house looking for him. And Japan has a very different refugee and asylum seeker system. They are allowed to work. After, I think they can, after 6 months they can apply for a refugee work permit.
I think we've come to an end for today.
Natural conclusion.
And thank you for coming and being kind to me. May I ask, Patsy, who is to regale us next week?
It will be Gwyn next week. Gwyn Gwynter. She's going to be talking about present day conscientious objectors in the UK. Looking forward to that.
Thank you very much.
Right.
Well, thank you. I'll say thank you, Ray. That was really interesting and led to a good discussion as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.
Right.